Hello, church family. It's 2-Minute Tuesday. During the month of August, our Sunday morning sermons have focused on the topic of Sabbath rest. Our 2-Minute Tuesdays for this month have focused on the flip side of rest, work. The accounts of the creation in Genesis make two things clear. We were created for work, and in the beginning, work was pure joy. It was only after we fell into sin and fell out of our perfect partnership with God that work became lonely and difficult and painful. It was at that point that misery entered our working life. Consultant Patrick Lencioni identifies these three signs of a miserable job. Anonymity. You feel unknown and unseen in your work. Irrelevance. You feel like your work doesn't matter. And immeasurement. You have no way to tell if you're doing good work. When we bring our working life back into our relationship with God, we find antidotes to these sources of job misery. This week we'll consider God's answer to the problem of irrelevance, and we find God's answer in an unlikely place. In Colossians 3, Paul addresses slaves who have become part of his Christian congregation. Paul says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving." In that context, slaves were the least relevant people in the world. Across the Roman world, slaves were treated as subhuman, and many were helpless to change their circumstances. So many worked in lonely settings where their work was menial and difficult and often unseen and unrecognized. This may have led many to despair that their work was irrelevant, it didn't matter. It may have tempted many to work half-heartedly, believing no one would notice anyway. Paul, in the context of delivering the Christian gospel, of course, says something remarkable about the personhood of slaves and everybody else, that is, within the family of God. You are of equal personhood and therefore equal value, and this has a surprising impact on your work. Paul tells these members of his church that their unseen, underappreciated work is recognized and valued by God. And this word that applies to the least in the social hierarchy applies to everybody else as well. So if you belong to Jesus Christ, you should care about your work because God cares. Everything you do matters because it matters to God. And it matters to God because you matter to God. This enables us to resist the temptation to do half-hearted work because we know that God notices, and more importantly, we know that God applauds whenever we give our best. Decades ago, in an article entitled "Why Work?", Dorothy Sayers wrote, "Work should be looked upon not as a necessary drudgery, but as a way of life in which our nature should find its proper exercise and delight, and so fulfill itself to the glory of God. That it should, in fact, be thought of as a creative activity undertaken for the love of the work itself, and that we, made in God's image, should make things as God makes them, for the sake of doing well a thing that is well worth doing." Your work, paid or unpaid, seen or unseen, is always relevant. It matters because you matter to God.